The Middle Ages refer to the time between the 6th and 15th centuries. Many people refer to this time as the Dark Ages, as plagues were running rampant across the globe, claiming the lives of countless people in terrible ways. Though, despite all of this, the Middle Ages were also a time of great progress. Today, we will be uncovering some amazing facts about the Middle Ages. The wedding ritual. It is very commonplace for there to be a large meal after middle-age weddings. This tradition has continued today as well, though there were a few other strange marriage rituals in the Middle Ages as well. One of these rituals involved young couples consummating their marriage in front of a small crowd of people. Following the wedding ceremony, the bride and groom would be led into the marriage bed that had been prepared in the days leading up to the wedding. They would then be placed in the bed, either sitting or lying down, and would be covered with a blanket. During the Middle Ages, sexual intercourse was the only means of validating a marriage. Because of this, the first night of passion needed to be verified by witnesses. Thus, the ritual of watching another couple have intercourse with one another was born. This ritual signified the transfer of guardianship from a woman's father to her new husband. We don't have too much evidence about how common this ritual was, but various historical documents seem to suggest that this was an everyday occurrence for most middle-aged individuals. Just imagine, you've just married the man or woman of your dreams. Everything is going well. Then your best man and maid of honor ask to watch the two of you in bed on your wedding night. I don't know about you, but I'd be super freaked out and would probably cut ties with both of them. Divine judgments. A divine judgment was a way for people in the Middle Ages to determine who was right and who was wrong in a legal battle. Decisions like this were most often used when the plaintiff and defendant didn't want to compromise or admit guilt. Since the courts often had very little evidence to go on, the only way they were able to determine guilt, or lack thereof, was to bring God into the equation and have him decide who was right and wrong. Though they wouldn't do this in any way that you're likely imagining. Instead, they would have the two individuals stick their hands into pots of boiling water. The person with the lesser burn would be considered victorious, and the loser would be considered guilty. They claimed that, in doing this, God would decide who should live and die. It seems as though they felt that God would punish the guilty party by burning them, while the defendant would remain mostly unharmed. However, a dual judgment was also very common, meaning both people would be found guilty or both innocent. Judgments like this were put first into practice in the 6th century, though we don't know for sure who could have dreamed up such a strange judicial practice. Thankfully, stuff like this doesn't happen anymore. These days it seems pretty obvious that if you stick your hand in hot water, you'll get burned. It's crazy to realize that people of this period often lacked basic common sense, or at least their leaders did. So, I guess things haven't changed too much since then. Football in the Middle Ages. You may think that football or soccer was invented recently. However, these sports have been around for a very long time. We know that people loved to play sports in the Middle Ages, though these games were not held within the confines of a court or field like they are today. It wouldn't be uncommon to see a football game taking place in the middle of a busy city street, or just outside the gates of a major city. People would play ball wherever they felt like, and would not stop until they reached a predetermined number of goals or points. What is very interesting is that football and soccer are the reason many of the windows in middle-aged buildings in areas of Italy and England were covered with bars. Glass was very expensive at the time and was considered a luxury. Because of this, people didn't want their windows to be knocked out by a flying ball. Bars would protect both the windows and the occupants of the home from a free-flying ball. Ball games were super popular back then, and we have documents that prove football was being played as early as the year 1137. This document describes how a young boy lost his life while playing the game, and this was very common. Without the rules and regulations of modern sports, these games would often become very violent, and people would lose their lives often. It should be mentioned that murdering somebody while playing ball was obviously illegal. But so long as you made it look like an accident, you're probably in the clear. Again, things haven't changed much these days either. Jokes aside, it wouldn't be uncommon to see an entire village or neighborhood playing a ball game. They would compete against each other, with some games lasting an entire day. It seems tiring enough to play football for a few hours with friends. I couldn't imagine playing throughout the whole day. Animal trials. This may be the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard, but I promise you, this was completely real. Animal trials are exactly what they sound like, trials that involve animals. Animals would often be accused of wrongdoing and would be forced to face punishment for their actions. Yes, you heard me right. A creature who isn't even able to comprehend the language being spoken during the trial is expected to defend itself against the accusations of a human. If the animal was convicted of the crime, the punishment could range from anything like being burned to being buried alive. If an entire species of animals were found to have been at fault or have been a danger to humans, the church would proclaim a ban around the animals, and members would be asked to avoid these animals at all costs, or the animals would all be killed. One of the most interesting cases of an animal trial comes from the year 1474. A rooster was brought to court for the heinous and unnatural act of laying an egg. Wolves and supposed werewolves would also be brought to court, most commonly in France. Court proceedings like this are no longer carried out, and it seems like most people have forgotten about this process entirely. It should be added that these trials were often taking place during the era of witch hunts as well as the Inquisition. So if people believe that humans would be witches, it's understandable why they would believe that a rooster laying an egg is unnatural and heinous. Over the years, many historians have questioned the validity of these cases. Some people believe that court hearings like this never happen, but mountains of historical evidence prove otherwise. It has also been asked if people truly believed that these animals were at fault for their wrongdoings, or if these cases could have simply been a joke or a form of entertainment.
Good one.
This is because most rulers at the time were outspoken against these trials, claiming animals had no knowledge of reason, so they were unable to carry out any sort of crime. We can assume that it would be extremely uncommon for an animal to be killed after being taken to court. Some historians even have reason to believe that these trials would have served as practice runs for new lawyers. Truth be told, there have been times that I would have liked to have taken my dog to court after he'd chewed my shoes or peed on the wall. Seriously, Max, you gotta stop it. The public capsule. So this is one of the strangest inventions to come out of the Middle Ages, and it seems completely useless these days. Back in the 14th century, men's fashion had dramatically changed in some areas of Europe. Men often used to wear long skirts, but these had been put away in exchange for jackets. Leg warmers were also traded for pants, and thus the modern masculine outfit was born. Though before pants were commonplace, a device known as the public capsule was developed to keep men's private parts free from harm and securely fastened to their bodies. This would be a small piece of clothing that would typically be designed in a round shape, though they would often be shaped like a banana or a cucumber for obvious reasons. These capsules became so popular that knights would wear them under their armor. However, What makes this strange is that they would often be created in bright colors that would directly contrast the armor or clothing the person was wearing. This was supposed to signify a man's potency. However, the church spoke out against these devices and said that they suggested that a man was constantly ready for sexual contact. These protective pads were considered sinful by the year 1555 and were rarely ever seen again after the year 1590. The shame mask. These masks are almost unbelievable, but they were fairly common in the Middle Ages. If a person was convicted of a crime, they would occasionally be sentenced to wear a mask that explained their crime to people passing by. These masks would have big tongues, ears, noses, or even horns. Each mask was created with a specific design that could explain the person's offense to the public. Some people would even be sentenced to death, then have these masks placed on their bodies to set an example for other citizens. The masks would allow the public to mock the person who was wearing it, drawing more attention to their crime or wrongdoing. However, the masks weren't only implemented for criminals. They would also be created for husbands whose wives were too chatty or noisy. A man could request that his wife be put into one of these masks that had a metal plate and thorns around the mouth to keep the woman from speaking. I couldn't even imagine treating a loved one this way, but actions like this were outrageously common throughout the Middle Ages. Medicine in the Middle Ages. During the Middle Ages, the average life expectancy for a person was only around 30 years. This was because people were forced to live in extremely unsanitary conditions that would usually lead to serious illness and eventually death. Houses and buildings were also poorly constructed, so it wouldn't be uncommon for you to be peacefully sleeping in your bed, then your house would cave in on you without notice. Though modern medicines also didn't exist. This means that a simple cut on your hand or foot could lead to an infection that would spread throughout your entire body and claim your life in a matter of days or weeks. Doctors were difficult to come by at the time, and it's estimated that most doctors would see a total of about 1,000 patients. Medicine from this period was rudimentary at best, and would usually be simple ground-up herbs that the doctors hoped would keep the patient's illness at bay. They rarely did. Though what is the most terrifying is that books were super expensive at the time and were very uncommon to come by. This meant that doctors would be practicing with very limited knowledge and often had to learn by experimenting on people with different herbs and remedies. This is how we learned about the anti-inflammatory properties of silver. If you look back at skeletons from the Middle Ages, you'll notice that many people who sustained bone or skull fractures would have their bones plugged with silver. This would keep the bones firmly attached and also provide anti-inflammatory properties for the rest of your life. Shockingly, amputations were common in the Middle Ages and would often be successful. There were also great strides made in antibiotic medications, such as a prescription that was created to treat MRSA infections. In the modern world, we do not have a perfect way of treating MRSA, though doctors in the Middle Ages had concocted a solution that would effectively kill the germs that cause MRSA. The recipe was tested out in 2015 and was found to be almost 100% effective. While middle-aged doctors were mostly clueless about treating medical conditions, they did make great strides in the late 1500s and were able to save dozens of lives from certain death. We have to give credit where it's due. Some of these doctors were seriously great at their job, considering the supplies and resources that were available to them. Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like button and ring the notification bell for more videos.